Marcus Johnson rolled his carry-on suitcase along the jet bridge, his body feeling the exhaustion of 3 consecutive long-haul flights, Seoul to Dubai to Frankfurt. The familiar scent of the aircraft greeted him as he stepped on board, but this time felt different. He wasn't in his sharp pilot uniform with the distinct 4 stripes on the shoulders. Instead, he wore comfortable black jeans and a burgundy sweater his son had gifted him last Christmas. C2A, just to your right, sir, the flight attendant at the entrance said with a polished, professional smile. Marcus nodded, keeping his excitement hidden. First class, it had been years since he sat there as a passenger. Most of the time, he was in the cockpit or flying economy when traveling with family. But today, thanks to accumulated frequent flyer miles and a lucky upgrade, he could finally indulge a little. The leather seat felt luxurious from this perspective, spacious, inviting. He stowed his bag in the overhead bin and sank into the soft cushioning, already feeling the tension in his shoulders begin to melt away. From his carry-on, he pulled out a dog-eared copy of The Night Circus, a novel his wife had been recommending for months. He placed it on the wide armrest, glancing across the aisle. A suited man with a sleek leather briefcase gave Marcus a curious second glance. Marcus pretended not to notice. After 20 years in commercial aviation, he was used to such reactions. An older woman seated in 2C kept sneaking glances as well, her pearl necklace shifting as she turned her head. Her expression, puzzled but polite, told the story Marcus knew all too well. She wasn't used to seeing someone like him in first class. Marcus quickly texted his wife, Angela. On board. First class is definitely an upgrade. Feels like I'm on vacation already. Angela replied, almost immediately. Enjoy it. And don't forget, the warm nuts are worth every mile you saved. Around him, passengers continued to board. The air filled with the familiar sounds of shuffling luggage, quiet conversations, and the occasional beep from overhead bins locking in place. Marcus breathed deeply, savoring the rare luxury of being on this side of the flight experience. For once, he didn't have to think about weather reports, pre-flight briefings, or keeping schedules on time. He could simply sit back and enjoy the 6-hour journey to Washington, D.C. He observed the cabin around him. In 1A, a young entrepreneur was furiously typing away on a slim laptop. Behind him, a couple in their 60s, seated in 3D and 3F, moved through a practiced routine of settling in for the flight. Across the aisle, the businessman from earlier had spread out a stack of reports, clicking a Mont-Blanc pen. Marcus smiled faintly, returning his focus to his book. The dimmed cabin lighting gave the space an intimate atmosphere, far removed from the bustling chaos of economy behind the curtain. A flight attendant made her way down the aisle, offering pre-flight drinks. Welcome aboard, she said with a warm but rehearsed tone. Would you like water, orange juice, or champagne? Water would be perfect, thank you, Marcus replied, his voice steady and polite. He caught the fleeting look of surprise in her eyes, but thought little of it. This wasn't his first time being underestimated. Within moments, a cool glass of water appeared on his tray table, the condensation beating against the smooth surface. Marcus took a sip and glanced out the window, watching the ground crew dart around in orange vests. They moved with precision as a luggage train snaked toward the cargo hold. Despite being away from the cockpit, Marcus found himself admiring the synchronicity of the operation. It felt strange, yet comforting, to view it all as an outsider. He let himself sink further into his seat, the hum of boarding activity blending into the background as the plane prepared for departure. Rachel Carter, the lead flight attendant, had flown this route more times than she could count. She had a knack for identifying passengers. Seasoned first-class regulars stood out from the newly upgraded by the way they carried themselves. Today, her eyes lingered on 2A. Marcus had been quiet and polite, but something about him didn't fit the typical first-class profile. No luxury luggage, no expensive accessories, just a simple carry-on and a well-loved paperback. "Excuse me, sir," Rachel said, stepping toward his row with a friendly but purposeful tone. "Could I take a look at your boarding pass?" Marcus looked up from his book, his expression calm and neutral. He reached into the seat pocket and handed her the ticket without hesitation. Rachel noticed his hands, strong but steady, with a simple gold wedding band. Just a routine check, she added, glancing at the boarding pass. It confirmed his seat as 2A, exactly as listed. Everything seemed in order, but her instincts pushed her to ask again. Were you upgraded today? The cabin grew slightly quieter. Passengers nearby perked up, their curiosity thinly veiled. The businessman across the aisle stopped mid-sentence, and the older woman in 2C turned her head more openly now, her pearls clinking softly. I booked this seat, Marcus Johnson replied evenly, his tone calm but tinged with weariness, though he chose not to elaborate. It's just that seat assignments can get mixed up sometimes, Rachel Carter said, her voice faltering. Are you sure you're not meant to be in economy? We could check. The older couple in 3D and 3F exchanged glances, their heads shaking slightly. The young man in 1A pulled off his headphones, intrigued. I'm sure, Marcus responded firmly, meeting her gaze. He didn't mention his experience or status. He didn't see the need. Rachel flushed slightly. The boarding pass in her hand clearly showed, too. It was legitimate. Yet she couldn't help herself. Is there an issue here? Laura Chung, the lead flight attendant, appeared beside Rachel, her tone calm, but her gaze sharp as it flicked between the two. I was just verifying this passenger seat assignment, Rachel explained, though it sounded weak, even to her. Laura glanced at the boarding pass. It's clearly marked 2A. Is there a specific reason you're concerned? Rachel hesitated, the realization of her own bias hitting her like a cold gust of wind. I apologize for the misunderstanding, she said finally, handing the boarding pass back with trembling fingers. Before Marcus could respond, Laura's phone buzzed. She glanced at it, her demeanor shifting. Mr. Johnson, she said in a low voice, we need you in the cockpit immediately. Marcus's expression hardened. Without hesitation, he stood, moving with quiet authority as he followed Laura. Rachel stepped aside, shame mounting as she watched him go. Beyond the curtain, the co-pilot emerged, pale and unsteady, assisted by crew members. The captain's faint voice issued sharp instructions from the cockpit. Passengers craned their necks, whispering. The businessman in 2B frowned in confusion. The young man in 1A half stood. Murmurs rippled through the cabin. Ladies and gentlemen, Laura said upon returning, her smile composed. We're experiencing a brief delay, but everything is under control. Realization dawned in first class. The man Rachel had questioned was an experienced off-duty pilot stepping in to assist. The businessman's pen froze mid-note. The older woman in 2C adjusted her scarf, looking down. The young man in 1A stared at the cockpit door, wide-eyed. Rachel stood frozen, shame creeping over her. She glanced at 2A, where Marcus's book lay, his bookmark carefully placed by another flight attendant. The weight of her assumptions gnawed at her. Marcus Johnson is one of our senior pilots, Laura whispered to Rachel. He's been flying for 20 years. He'll get us to DC safely, just like he's done countless times before. The rest of the flight passed in a haze for Rachel. Marcus and the captain worked together seamlessly, guiding the plane through the skies. Meanwhile, Rachel moved through her duties mechanically, her earlier actions replaying in her mind. When they landed, Marcus stepped out of the cockpit, relaxed once more, his book in hand. Mr. Johnson, Rachel said quietly. I owe you an apology. Marcus studied her for a moment, then smiled faintly. Acknowledging it is the first step. What you do next matters more. With that, he walked away, leaving Rachel to reflect. That evening, she signed up for training on unconscious bias, determined to change. Marcus's words stayed with her, a quiet but powerful reminder to approach her role with humility and respect.